Laughter echoed off the polished walls of the upscale restaurant, blending with the clinking of cutlery and the murmur of expensive conversations. The scent of grilled ribeye, designer cologne, and aged bourbon hung thick in the air. Near the corner of the bar, Ava stood quietly, her hand gently resting on a sparkling glass of ice water. She wasn't drinking, of course. At 6 months pregnant, the growing curve beneath her satin dress reminded her of the life she was carrying, and the sacrifices she made every day. She'd become used to giving up the finer things in their wine cellar. More than that, she had gotten used to nights like this, her husband Ryan taking center stage, performing for his colleagues with exaggerated flair, jokes that stung just a little too hard, and a self-assuredness that bordered on arrogance. He looked like the perfect poster of a rising executive. Crisp suit, slick smile, and a voice just loud enough to dominate the table. His friends, men with Rolexes and stock options, leaned forward with every word, eager to laugh at his punchlines and agree with his half-truths. "Marriage," Ryan declared, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "is all about strategy. If you play your cards right, it's the best deal in town." He gestured in Ava's direction without sparing her a glance. "Take my wife, for example. She's got the dream gig. No pressure, no emails, no meetings. Just chilling at home, waiting for the baby to arrive." Laughter erupted from the table. Ava's hand tightened around her glass, her knuckles paling for a moment before she slowly relaxed her grip. She had mastered the art of not reacting. She didn't flinch anymore when Ryan made her the butt of a joke. She'd learned to keep her posture calm and her smile pleasant, even when every word chipped away at her dignity. One of Ryan's co-workers, a tall man with a smug grin and an ego to match, raised his eyebrows. "So what exactly does Ava do these days?" he asked, voice dripping with condescension. Ryan leaned back in his chair and smirked. "She's on maternity duty full-time now," he said, dragging out the words like they were part of a stand-up. "Routine. Growing a human is her big accomplishment these days." More laughter followed. Someone raised their glass and said, "Man, I need a gig like that. Ice cream, naps, and stretchy pants." Ava took a sip of her water, the cold sting grounding her. She didn't react. That would have given Ryan too much satisfaction. He never made comments like this in private. No, he saved his performances for an audience, for when he could turn her into a prop in his self-made success story. She turned slightly, adjusting the cuff of her bracelet, and glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. There he was, grinning like he was the king of the room, relaxed, unbothered, acting like the life they lived, every luxury, every expense, was earned solely through his hard work. The bitter irony of it all nearly made her laugh. The house they lived in, the lavish trips, the very company that paid for the whiskey in his hand, it all existed because of her. Ava had built the foundation of their life long before Ryan ever walked into that corner office. She was the architect, the strategist, the visionary, and yet here he was, reducing her to nothing more than a silent background character in his story. Ryan turned to her suddenly, waving a hand like he was calling over a waitress. "Hey, babe," he said with a grin. "Why don't you come say something? You've been awfully quiet tonight." Ava straightened her shoulders and walked over with controlled grace. Her smile was faint, unreadable. "Just enjoying the show," she said coolly. Didn't want to interrupt all the expert advice. He barely registered the sarcasm. He just chuckled and turned back to his table. "See? She knows she's lucky." "Man," someone chimed in. "You've got it made. Beautiful wife, kid on the way, promotion around the corner. What more could you want?" Ryan puffed up a little at that. "Yeah," he agreed, taking a long sip. "It's a lot, though. Mortgage, baby stuff, everything's on me. But hey, someone's got to carry the weight." Another chuckle from the table. Ryan leaned in again and lowered his voice slightly. "Can't carry her forever, though. After the baby's born, she'll need to get up and actually contribute." Ava's breath caught in her throat, but Ryan didn't notice. He was too caught up in his performance, too busy soaking in the applause of men who thought like him, men who assumed a woman's worth started and ended with how useful she was to their needs. What none of them realized What Ryan had conveniently forgotten was that Ava wasn't some passive, fragile housewife. She wasn't just carrying a child. She was carrying the future of the very company they all worked for. She was their superior, and in less than 24 hours they were all going to find out just how wrong they had been about her. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us keep making stories like this. Later that night, Ava sat alone in the nursery, bathed in soft golden light. Her hands rested on her belly as she slowly traced circles over the fabric of her dress. Down the hall, Ryan was likely still drinking, bragging, playing the part of the overworked provider. But Ava wasn't thinking about him. Not really. She was thinking about the next move, about how she'd let this go on too long. She thought back to the day she met him, how charming he seemed back then, how naive she had been, how easily she had let him believe she was just another woman trying to keep up in a man's world. But that version of Ava was gone now, and tomorrow, Ryan would finally understand exactly who he had underestimated. Ava stared out the nursery window, the moonlight casting gentle shadows across the room. The soft rhythm of her breathing matched the tiny kicks she could feel against her ribs. Her mind, however, was sharp, focused. It wasn't just about payback anymore. It was about reclaiming her voice, her dignity, and the truth she had willingly hidden for too long. When she first met Ryan, she had been exhausted from a 10-hour boardroom war at Landon & Fields, the same company that would later merge with Blake Systems under her lead. That evening, she'd walked out of the building craving nothing but coffee and 5 minutes of silence. Instead, she met him. He was standing outside the cafe on 9th and Carson, pacing as he spoke into his phone, full of energy and animated ambition. His tie was crooked, his shoes scuffed, and his smile unapologetically confident. Ava hadn't been looking for anything, but something about his raw, unfiltered charm disarmed her. He looked over and said, "Rough day?" She had smiled weakly, rubbing her temples. "You could say that." He leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was offering a secret. "Sounds like you need a new boss. I ditched mine last month. Now I freelance. Life's better when no one's breathing down your neck." The irony had nearly made her laugh. She hadn't corrected him. She could have told him she was the boss, that everyone else in that building answered to her. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded and played along. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she was curious what it would feel like to let someone assume she was something else. Something simpler, quieter, softer. Their first date was dinner at a small Italian place on 6th, then a second date, then a weekend getaway. Each time, Ryan showed up like a man determined to conquer the world, and Ava let herself believe that his ambition came from a place of purpose. He had dreams, big ones. He talked about them in detail, owning property, launching a startup, being his own boss. At first, she admired his drive. It reminded her of herself 10 years earlier, fighting for her first million in rooms full of men who didn't think she belonged. But looking back, she saw it clearly now. Ryan didn't want to build something with someone. He wanted to own something, or someone. There was no partnership in his eyes, only performance. They married within the year. And for a while, Ava convinced herself she had found a man who loved her, who appreciated her power, even if he didn't fully understand it. But little signs chipped away at that illusion. The way he dismissed others, the way he exaggerated, his role in every success. "My team couldn't run a project without me," he'd brag at parties, shaking his head with mock exhaustion. "I have to carry the whole floor." At first, Ava smiled politely. She thought it was just his way of coping with the pressure. But over time, she realized he actually believed it. He needed to be the center of attention, the guy everyone toasted at dinner. And the way he spoke about people in service roles, waiters, junior staff, anyone he deemed beneath him, made her stomach turn. He saw people as pawns in his story, and he'd forgotten that the person writing the script was standing right beside him. She remembered a dinner conversation that hit harder than most. She had asked him about a deal she knew had collapsed behind the scenes. He brushed her off with a half-smile. "You wouldn't understand," he said, pouring more wine into his glass. "It's complicated. High-level stuff. A lot of pressure. At my level, her level?" She nearly laughed. Ryan was a decent actor. He walked with purpose, shook hands like a CEO, and mimicked the language of confidence so well that people around him never looked twice. That's why she had stayed as long as she did, because part of her still clung to the man he pretended to be. But then he stopped asking questions. He no longer cared what she was building or dreaming of. He assumed everything about her. What she wanted, how she thought, what made her feel fulfilled. One night, while she sat on the couch reviewing emails, he looked at her and said, almost absent-mindedly, "Must be nice, not having to worry about a job anymore." Ava turned toward him slowly, eyebrows raised. He gave a faint smile and added, "You know, just relax and focus on the baby. Let me handle the big stuff." That was the moment something in her snapped. She had watched him for years, watched him coast through a career based on her generosity, watched him wear success like a costume stitched from her sacrifices, and now he was belittling her, again, because he genuinely believed she was dependent on him. The next morning, she made a single, precise phone call. Her voice was calm. Her message was simple. "I want everything, emails, transfers, accounts. I want to know exactly what he's hiding." The investigator got to work immediately. Within days, the pieces began falling into place. First a few irregularities, then clear signs of embezzlement. Funds rerouted from joint accounts into private ones. Transactions masked as business expenses. And most shocking of all, internal files shared with rival firms. Ava felt a cold fire build in her chest. By the end of the week, her legal team had built a solid case. Her security head scheduled a full escort protocol. Her assistant prepped emergency memos for the board. And Ava? She simply waited, not out of hesitation, but out of strategy. Ryan didn't know it yet, but his entire life was about to collapse. Inside the glass-walled war room of Arden and Blake, Ava sat at the head of the table. Her fingers tapped slowly against the smooth, lacquered wood, her gaze fixed on the skyline outside. She had always found calm in this view, order in the chaos. But today it wasn't calm she needed. It was precision. On either side of her sat the key players she trusted most. Karen, her head of legal, was sorting through a thick folder of flagged transactions. Her eyes were focused, her lips pursed. She didn't speak unless she had something concrete. Across from her, Miles, chief of security, leaned forward with quiet intensity, waiting for the signal. And to Ava's right, Isla, her executive assistant and longtime confidant, scanned incoming emails on her tablet, her brow furrowed, every second counted. The room hummed with quiet tension. Ava broke the silence. "Do we have it all?" Karen didn't look up as she responded. "Every cent, every lie, every transfer, offshore accounts. Duplicate reimbursements, the files are tight. Legal can't poke a hole in any of it." Ava nodded once, then turned to Miles. "Security?" "We're locked in," he said. "2 guards stationed outside the executive wing. As soon as you give the word, we'll escort him off the property." Ava allowed herself a slow exhale. The first report from the investigator had uncovered just a sliver, an offshore stash, buried in a web of shell accounts. But it hadn't taken long before the truth expanded. Ryan had been stealing not just from their joint finances, but from company reserves. Payments disguised as vendor contracts. Backdoor deals slipped through during board transitions. Subtle. Clever. Clever enough to fool almost anyone. But Ava wasn't just anyone. She knew her company better than anyone else alive. Every approval, every payment schedule, every department head. Nothing escaped her long. And when her team dug deeper, they found email chains, conversations with competitors, leaked talking points, even internal performance metrics passed to rival firms. It was more than betrayal. It was war. Karen slid a base, final document across the table, pointing at the bottom line. Termination letter, signed, Charges listed: breach of contract, theft of intellectual property, corporate espionage. Isla turned her tablet toward Ava. HR's locked and loaded. Press release is ready. We'll notify the board right after. He's off the property. Ava's jaw tightened. He's not going to go quietly, Karen smirked. Doesn't have to. He'll just go. Isla gave a low breath. I still can't believe he thought he was pulling this off. Ava gave a small, cool smile. He didn't think. He knew. That's the difference. He built his entire life on the fantasy that he was untouchable, that everyone else was disposable. Miles folded his arms. He won't see it coming, Will. He still thinks tomorrow's about his promotion, Ava replied. There was a pause, then Karen asked, You want to deliver this yourself? Ava looked at her without hesitation. Yes. You sure? Isla leaned in gently. We can handle it. You've done enough. I need him to see it, Ava said. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't crack, but it was firm. After everything he's done, after reducing me to a housewife in front of his friends, stealing from my company, mocking me like I was some decoration in his world, I want him to hear it from me. Karen nodded. Then we'll be ready. Isla glanced at the time. It's almost 1. Anything else you want to review? Ava rose to her feet slowly, stretching her shoulders. No, you all know what to do. Karen gathered the papers. We'll have the board standing by after the meeting. Ava nodded. Good. I want this finalized by end of day. She turned to Miles. Brief your team again in the morning. Every hallway, every office door. I don't want him trying to delete anything on the way out. Already in motion, Miles confirmed. Isla hesitated. Ava, are you okay? Ava paused. The question hung in the air, then she offered a small smile. I will be. The room went quiet. Not from hesitation, but solidarity. Everyone there knew what tomorrow meant. Ava looked at the screen in front of her one last time, the termination letter glowing beneath the office lights. Her phone buzzed. On the desk beside her, it was the last message she had sent Ryan that night. Don't wait up, big day tomorrow. The next morning, Ryan walked into the executive boardroom with his usual swagger. His suit was tailored to perfection, shoes shining under the recessed lighting, and that signature grin plastered across his face like armor. He adjusted his watch, already imagining how the day would end. With a title change, maybe a standing ovation. He had played the part well, smiled at the right people, took credit at the perfect moments. And now it was time to collect. But the room didn't feel right. It was quiet, too quiet. The people inside weren't smiling. They weren't leaning in. Their faces were tight, unreadable. Then he saw her. Ava stood at the head of the table, arms folded, expression unreadable. Not surprised, not pleased, just ready. He chuckled and stepped forward. Didn't expect you here, he said, gesturing toward the others. What's this? Surprise celebration? No one answered. Ava's voice was calm but cold. Ryan, you've been stealing. His smirk faltered. What? She didn't blink. You're fired. The silence was brutal. No one moved. No one came to his defense. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass, the city moved like nothing had changed. Because, for them it hadn't, but Ryan's world had just snapped. She slid a thick folder across the table. It landed in front of him with a dull thud. Open it, she said, her voice smooth. Ryan's hand hovered above the cover. For the first time in his life, he hesitated. When he finally flipped it open, his face drained of color. Expense reports, account transfers, leaked emails. Even his messages to Ava's competitors were printed and highlighted. There was one message in bold at the bottom of the page. If I play this right, I'll never work another day in my life. He looked up slowly, mouth dry. How? She didn't answer, his voice cracked. I can explain. I'm not interested, she said flatly. Everything we need is in that folder. He turned to the board, desperation rising. This is insane. You all know me. This is just... The board has already voted, said Martin, the CFO, who once used to call Ryan a star in the making. But his voice today was devoid of warmth. You're done. Ryan's ears rang. The conference room doors opened, and two security guards stepped inside. One nodded politely. Mr. Dalton, if you'll come with us. Ryan looked at Ava one last time. His voice dropped, dark. You don't want to do this. Her smile was faint. I already did. Ryan's jaw clenched. As the two security guards stepped closer, the words, Mr. Dalton, please, echoed in the silence of the boardroom like the final nail being driven in. For a moment he didn't move. His pride, once inflated by delusion, stood there bruised, unsure how to process what had just happened. Every instinct screamed at him to fight back, to argue, to demand an explanation. But what was there to explain? The folder lying open in front of him told the whole story, line by line, transaction by transaction. There was no doubt, no wiggle room, no miracle excuse. Ava stood still, composed, her arms crossed. She tilted her head slightly, her voice soft but firm. You should go, Ryan. Before this becomes more embarrassing than it already is. That line cut sharper than anything else. Slowly, Ryan straightened his spine, gathered what was left of his ego, and walked toward the exit. He didn't speak, didn't meet anyone's eyes. The guards flanked him silently, but their presence was enough. At the door, Ava called out, "Oh, and Ryan?" He stopped without turning. "Don't forget to leave your key card at the front desk." A visible tick jumped in his cheek, but he didn't respond. He walked out, and with him, the last illusion of his invincibility disappeared. An hour later, Ryan sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding him upright. His knuckles were white, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. The same hands that once signed high-level contracts now trembled over his phone screen. He started calling. Richard from the board, Tony from legal, even Miles from security. No answer. Straight to voicemail. Every name he once counted as an ally now ghosted him in real time. He dialed again. This time, Brent, someone he once mentored. The phone rang, then clicked. Ryan, Brent's voice came through, guarded. I can't talk, I'm sorry. Wait, Brent, come on, Ryan said, desperate to keep him on the line. This isn't what it looks like. Ava's twisting this, she set me up. Brent sighed. Look, man, you really think she could pull off something like this if there wasn't truth behind it? Ryan's throat tightened. You've known me for years, and I didn't want to believe it, but the files and the signatures, the bank links, it's all there. I've seen it myself. There was a pause, and then the final blow. Don't call again. I can't be part of this. Click. The call dropped. Ryan tossed the phone onto the passenger seat with a shaky hand. His mind raced. He had to take control of the narrative. He wasn't going to let Ava define how this story ended. If the board wouldn't listen, if his so-called friends were gone, then he'd go to the press. He reached for his laptop, flipping it open and logging into his private accounts. But the moment the screen loaded, a red message popped up. Access restricted. Contact administrator? His mouth went dry. He tried again with his offshore account. Blocked. He opened another tab. His cloud drive. Wiped. He leaned back in the seat, the full scope of Ava's precision dawning on him. She had already locked every door, closed every loophole, anticipated every step before he could take it. Still, he wasn't finished. Not yet. He picked up his phone again and scrolled through his encrypted contacts. One name stood out. A firm that had been circling Blake Enterprises for years. They'd always wanted insider information. He hesitated for only a second. Then, hit call. The line picked up after 2 rings. Didn't expect to hear from you, said a cold voice on the other end. Ryan forced a half smile. Let's just say I have something that might interest you. Oh, the voice replied with interest. Ava isn't as clean as she looks. I've got emails, contracts, some inside numbers your team might want to see. There was a pause. You mean the same documents her legal team handed over an hour ago? Ryan's heart skipped. What? Yeah, the man said, a touch of amusement in his voice. She beat you to it. Turns out she's more thorough than anyone thought. Everything's locked down. Your name's scorched, my friend. The line went dead. Ryan stared at the screen. He dialed again, blocked, and then his phone buzzed. A new text. Unknown number. It read, "Nice try. Let's not make this worse than it already is. Blake Enterprises." Legal Ryan's face drained of color. She knew, she had already known. He sat frozen for a few long seconds, then slammed the phone down in frustration. His breathing was ragged now, erratic. If he couldn't go to the competition and he couldn't reach the board, he had one final option. The media. If he could get ahead of the story, spin it just right, maybe he could salvage something. He pulled up a contact, an old journalist, friend who loved sensational headlines more than truth. The phone rang. "Hey, this is Ryan Dalton," he said quickly. "I've got a story for you. The real one. The one Ava doesn't want you to hear." Silence. Then the reporter laughed. "You mean the same story her team gave us with full documentation and verified signatures?" "Yeah. There's no twist left, man. You're done." Ryan's grip on the phone tightened. "You don't get to flip this, Dalton. She's the woman who cleaned up your mess. You're the story, and not the hero." The call ended. Another buzz lit up his screen. Breaking. Ryan Dalton terminated amidst corporate fraud investigation. A second notification followed. The rise and fall of Ryan Dalton. From boardroom to backroom, he dropped the phone like it burned him. The news had broken. Not only had Ava taken him down, she had made sure the world saw it. The TV in Ryan's motel room flickered with the harsh glow of late-night news coverage. He sat hunched on the edge of the bed, a stale paper coffee cup in his hand, and his name echoing off the walls from the news anchor's voice. Former Arden and Blake executive Ryan Dalton now faces potential criminal charges after internal documents revealed years of financial misconduct. His wife, Ava Blake, founder and CEO, confirmed the separation of employment, citing breach of trust, theft, and corporate sabotage. He muted the TV with a quick stab at the remote. The silence felt worse. The faint buzz of the broken light above him pulsed in rhythm with the throb in his head. In less than 48 hours, his life had evaporated. His home, his friends, his influence, gone. And now the only thing he had was a low-budget motel room that reeked of old smoke and regret. He looked down at his phone again. Call logs, texts, all the names in his list, familiar faces from charity events, poker nights, corporate dinners, now silent. Not one person willing to pick up, not even a, "Hey, I'll get back to you." Just a wall of voicemail and blue, check marks that went unanswered. He tried one last number. Mom. His voice cracked slightly. He hadn't called her in months. There was a pause. Then, "Ryan. Look, I need a place to stay," he said quickly. "Just for a bit. I'll figure things out soon, I promise." "I saw the news," she said flatly. "It's not true," Ryan lied. "Ava twisted everything. She turned people against me." His mother was quiet for a long beat. Then she said, "Did she make you transfer money out of company accounts?" Ryan's throat dried up. "It's not that simple. Actually, it is," she cut in, her tone turning cold. "You've been cutting corners since college, Ryan. I covered your tuition debt. I paid your rent when you blew your startup fund in a casino. I ignored the red flags because you were my son. But this, I won't clean up your mess anymore." Ryan's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're serious?" "I am," she said. "Don't call me again until you've owned what you did." The line went dead. He stared at the phone in disbelief. A bitter chuckle slipped from his lips. Days ago, he had stood in front of a room full of executives and laughed at Ava for having it easy. He had made her look small, weak, like she didn't matter. Now he was the one alone in a motel room with no money, no allies, and not even his mother willing to answer the door. Meanwhile, Ava stood in her office overlooking the city, the same skyline she used to feel distant from, but not anymore. Now it felt like hers. Behind her, Isla walked in, holding a sleek magazine in both hands. "It's out," she said simply, placing the issue on Ava's desk. Ava turned. The cover glistened in the afternoon light. There she was, poised and calm, seated at the head of a boardroom table, arms crossed, eyes focused. The headline read, "The woman who built the empire he thought he owned." A slow smile pulled at Ava's lips. "They wanted to go with something more dramatic," Isla said with a small laugh. "The phantom CEO who brought down the boys' club. But I told them this felt more like you." Ava nodded, flipping open the cover. She paused at the opening line. For years, Ava Blake stood silently behind a man who mistook her brilliance for background noise. What he didn't know, she built the company, and now she's rebuilding the industry. Ava closed the magazine gently and let the moment sit in the air. It wasn't about the article. It wasn't about the headlines or interviews or the way. People were suddenly talking like they had always known she was the brains behind the operation. It was about what came next. "Policy changes are rolling out next quarter," Isla said, sitting across from her. "Paid parental leave's already been approved. And the mentorship initiative for female employees. Over 200 sign-ups in the first hour. Some of them cried." Ava blinked. "Cried?" "They said it's the first time someone at the top actually saw them." That hit her harder than she expected. Not with sadness, but with purpose. She had spent so long shrinking in rooms full of men like Ryan, smiling politely while being dismissed. Now she would make sure no woman under her leadership ever had to feel that small. "And the interview requests?" Ava asked. "They want you on Bloomberg next week, CNBC the week after. Everyone wants to talk to the elusive CEO who played chess while her husband was busy playing poker with the company." Ava let out a quiet laugh. "Line up the ones that matter, but I'm not hiding anymore." Isla smiled. "Already working on it." Downstairs in a modest electronics store near the edge of the city, Ryan scanned another barcode. The register beeped, flat and dull. "That'll be $41.50, he mumbled without looking up. The customer swiped their card and walked out without saying a word. He wore a cheap polo shirt with a stitched tag that read, "Ryan, Associate." The floor manager was barely 22 and already talked to him like he was disposable. Just last year, Ryan had been drinking $100 whiskey and lecturing interns on corporate mindset. Now, he asked customers if they wanted extended warranties on Bluetooth speakers. The line grew. Another customer stepped forward, placing a magazine on the counter. Ryan's stomach flipped. Ava's face stared up at him from the cover. The headline glared like a spotlight in a prison yard. The customer tilted his head. "Hey, weren't you that executive? From Arden something?" Ryan froze. "You're the guy she fired, right?" The man laughed softly and shook his head. "Damn. Life comes at you fast." Ryan didn't respond. He just scanned the item, handed over the receipt, and turned away. As the customer walked out, Ryan glanced down at the magazine again. Ava's eyes stared back. Calm, confident, powerful. He could still hear her voice in his head. "You should go now, before this gets more embarrassing." He once thought he'd bounce back, that he'd find some way to rewrite the narrative. But now he knew there would be no comeback, no redemption arc. Ava hadn't just ended his career. She had erased his name from the rooms he used to dominate. And worst of all, she probably didn't think about him at all. The nursery was quiet. Golden light spilled from the corner lamp, washing the room. Warmth. Ava sat in the rocking chair, her newborn daughter curled against her chest, her tiny breath soft and rhythmic. The world outside could wait. In this room, everything that mattered was within arm's reach. She ran a gentle fingertip along her baby's cheek and smiled. A real one, the kind she hadn't felt in months, maybe longer. "You're going to be okay," she whispered softly. "Actually, no, we're going to be better than okay." And she meant it, because for the first time in a very long time there was nothing to hide, no performance to maintain, no pretending to play small. So someone else could feel bigger. Ava pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead and leaned back in the chair, letting her eyes drift across the room. The walls were painted a soft blush, the shelves lined with picture books and little plush animals. A room built with care, not as a distraction from pain, but as a place of healing and new beginnings. She wasn't thinking about Ryan anymore. Not about the headlines or the boardroom or even the satisfaction of seeing him walk out with security. That part of her life, the one where she played a role to protect a fragile ego, was over. Instead, her mind wandered to the email, the one she had found just before the legal team finalized the dismissal package. It was dated 7 months before their wedding, a forward from Ryan to one of his friends. The subject line, "The investment plan." The contents made her breath catch then, but now they made her stronger. "If she's rich, I win. If not, I'll make sure she stays dependent. Either way, I'm good." Those words used to sting, but now they were just proof, undeniable evidence of who he had always been. Not a husband, not a partner, a strategist, a taker. Someone who viewed people as opportunities rather than human beings. And she had fallen for it. For years, she had explained away the red flags, excused the cutting remarks, the subtle digs, the way he took up space in every conversation while shrinking her presence like it was a favor. She thought it was stress, or ego, or immaturity. Anything but what it really was. Manipulation dressed in charm. She had told herself he loved her, that he just didn't know how to express it, that he didn't mean to silence her in meetings, or joke about her break from real work, or pretend her empire wasn't what paid for their life. But the truth was never complicated. He had never seen her as an equal. He had only ever seen her as leverage, and the second she stopped playing that role, he tried to replace her with control. Ava exhaled slowly, staring at the ceiling, her daughter sleeping soundly in her arms. There was no grief anymore, no mourning of the relationship. Only relief. Relief that she was no longer tolerating a love that required her to disappear. Down the hall, the security system chirped. Someone had opened the gate to the driveway. It was probably Isla, bringing over a fresh set of reports. Or maybe Karen, dropping off the next round of policy documents for the board. The company hadn't slowed down after the scandal. If anything, it had grown stronger. With Ryan gone, something had shifted at Arden and Blake. Productivity rose. Communication across departments flowed faster. New hires, especially women, commented on how different the workplace felt. How much easier it was to be heard. Ava had started meeting with junior staff personally, listening, asking questions, creating space. Her mentorship program, launched just 3 weeks ago, had already reached capacity, not just with female execs, but with engineers, analysts, and interns too. It wasn't just about career advice. It was about dignity, visibility, a place where no one had to ask for permission to be taken seriously. She walked the halls now without people lowering their voices, without the uncomfortable glances they used to give her when Ryan was beside her. Those looks were gone, replaced with something else, respect. She had built an empire while pretending not to own it. Now, she was stepping into it fully, and no one could take that from her again. Later that evening, she stood by the window in her home office, watching the sun disappear behind the skyline. A folder lay open on her desk, the corner of a magazine. Peeking out, on the cover, her, not smiling, not posing, just standing at the edge of a rooftop, the headline bold beneath her image. She let them underestimate her, then took it all back. There was a soft knock at the door. Isla peeked in. "Everything good?" Ava nodded. "Yeah, just wrapping up." Isla walked over and placed a signed document on the desk. "The board finalized the new division. It's named after your mother, just like you wanted." Ava smiled. "Thank you." She'd be proud. "She'd tell me to stop working so late," Ava said with a soft chuckle. Isla paused. "You know, Ryan emailed." Ava's face didn't change. "What did he want?" "Apology, sort of. Half-formed, said he wanted to talk, said he's working retail now." Ava looked back out the window. "Let him. You don't want to reply?" She turned. "For what? Closure? He already gave me that. He just didn't realize it." Isla didn't press further. She simply nodded and slipped out of the room, leaving Ava with the city lights and the quiet hum of peace. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. Of her story, her name, her power. And as she returned to her daughter's side, gently brushing a blanket over the sleeping baby. She knew this truth deeper than ever before. She hadn't just survived him, she had outgrown him. The buzz of fluorescent lights hummed above Ryan's head as he stood behind the checkout counter at the electronics store, scanning a tangle of phone chargers and AA batteries. The scanner beeped with every item, but the sound barely registered. His mind had become numb to it all, just like his hands, which moved on autopilot. "That'll be $36.20, he muttered, not even looking up. The customer swiped their card and walked off without a word. This was his life now. He glanced down at his uniform, an oversized blue polo with his name stitched into the chest. Ryan, associate. The irony wasn't lost on him. Just over a year ago, he was walking into luxury boardrooms, pitching fake strategies and soaking in praise he hadn't earned. Now he was clocking in under a 19-year-old manager who asked him to restock HDMI cables before lunch. As he reached for the next item on the counter, his eyes landed on the magazine cover again. A customer had left it there. Ava's face stared back at him, calm, confident, almost distant. The headline screamed louder than anything he'd heard in weeks. The CEO who rebuilt an empire. Her husband tried to steal. Ryan's stomach twisted. He pushed the magazine aside, but it didn't help. He still saw her, not just on the cover, but everywhere. On screens in the store, on social media, in headlines he couldn't avoid. Ava had become a symbol of resilience and leadership, a quiet powerhouse who had taken back everything she had built, publicly, unapologetically. The world loved her now. Even the people who once laughed at her silence now quoted her interviews and reposted her speeches. Ryan had expected her to stumble, to be overwhelmed without him, to hide, but she hadn't hidden. She had risen. He thought time would soften the story, that people would forget. But Ava didn't fade into the background. She expanded, and every article, every appearance, every board announcement only made his new life feel smaller. He still remembered the last thing she said to him just before he was escorted out of the boardroom. "You should go, before this gets any more embarrassing." He thought it was just anger at the time, a sting, a moment. But it wasn't. It was the end, and he hadn't even realized it. That night, after locking up the store, Ryan sat alone, in the break room scrolling through his phone. No missed calls, no new messages. He opened the news out of habit. More praise for Ava, more milestones hit by Arden and Blake. Her name wasn't just attached to the company now, it was the brand. Investors used her as a benchmark. Young professionals wrote LinkedIn posts about her leadership style, and he was invisible. Even when people remembered him, it was as a footnote, a cautionary tale, a forgotten man behind a brilliant woman. He scrolled further, stopping at a photo, Ava on stage at a women's leadership event. She stood tall, baby on her hip, surrounded by rising female execs. The caption read, "She didn't just break the glass ceiling, she built the roof higher so others could rise too." Ryan shut the phone off. For a long time, he just sat there, staring at the floor. No rage, no schemes. Just an emptiness that felt like gravity pressing down on his chest. Everything he had tried to manipulate, her love, her wealth, her silence, had turned into a spotlight he couldn't escape. But she didn't even see him anymore. Across the city, Ava stood outside the new headquarters of Arden and Blake's mentorship wing. The building was sleek and modern, its lobby filled with fresh graduates, new hires, and returning mothers ready to restart their careers. The walls were covered in framed portraits, women from every department, every background. Ava walked through the hallway slowly, her heels soft against the polished floor, her daughter nestled in a sling against her chest. Karen joined her near the conference room. "We're full, again. I might have to build a second wing." Ava smiled. "That's a good problem." They walked together into the main briefing area where dozens of women waited, some in suits, some in nursing scrubs, some fresh from college. Ava stood in front of them and paused. "I want to thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady but warm. "When I started in this industry, there were very few rooms where I felt seen, heard, valued. and for a long time I let myself believe that being silent was the way to survive. She looked around the room. But silence doesn't protect you. It only delays the fallout. There were nods. A few eyes welled. I spent years letting someone else tell my story. I gave space I should have claimed, and when I finally took it back, when I finally said no more, I realized that power isn't something you wait for. It's something you reclaim. A round of applause broke out. Ava let it land quietly before she continued. This isn't about one woman outsmarting one man. This is about rewriting the rules for all of us. No one in this room has to wait for permission to be powerful. As the women stood, applauding louder now, Ava felt a calm strength settle into her bones. Not fire, not revenge, peace, purpose. A knowing that she had made it through not just for herself, but for every woman who had once been talked over, overlooked, or underestimated. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Ava stood at her office window holding her daughter. The world outside sparkled with possibility. She whispered softly into the baby's ear, "You won't grow up watching your mother shrink." The baby stirred, blinking slowly. "No," Ava smiled. "You'll grow up seeing her lead." And as the lights blinked on across the skyline, floor by floor, building by building, Ava Blake knew that this was only the beginning.